Yo guys, The Man with the Golden Gun meant the end to a lot of things in the James Bond franchise. It was the end of the once golden partnership between Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli. It was the last Bond film to be directed by Guy Hamilton. And it nearly meant the end of the entire James Bond franchise. So, the James Bond franchise needed a major comeback. So let's talk about it. With this one, I have to tell a little bit about the backstory. Like I said, The Man with the Golden Gun nearly ended the entire James Bond franchise, and Harry Saltzman went through some financial trouble at the time, so he sold his shares of the company, which led to his departure. So the future of the franchise was resting on Cubby Broccoli's shoulders. And because The Man with the Golden Gun didn't earn that much money for Bond standards, and it had some very mixed reviews at the time. So the next one needed to be a big hit and a critical success. So the title chosen for the next movie was The Spy Who Loved Me. And Ian Fleming didn't sell the rights to the actual novel with the same name because apparently he wasn't proud of that one. So for the first time in history, it was a completely original story. To direct this movie, they returned to Lewis Gilbert, who previously directed You Only Live Twice. It was also the first time that it took longer than 2 years to produce a James Bond movie. There was a 3-year gap in between The Man with the Golden Gun and The Spy Who Loved Me. So, was the James Bond franchise able to survive? Let's now talk about the movie itself, starting with the negatives. There actually aren't a lot of negative things I have to say about this movie. Yes, the main villain is pretty weak, he is just a Blofeld clone, but it's mostly compensated by one of his henchmen. And yeah, the story is a bit similar to You Only Live Twice, but I actually think it's better executed in this movie. And there are a few miniature shots that are quite noticeable, but to be completely honest, those are all my complaints I have with this movie. So now we can start talking about all the amazing things in this movie. And right from the get-go, this movie looks and feels a lot more grand and cinematic than the last 3 Bond movies. Whereas those 3 looked relatively cheap, this movie looks grand and epic. And this movie starts off a lot stronger than the last couple of movies. In fact, I think that this movie is my favorite pre-title sequence of the entire franchise. All the plot points are set into place and we have an amazing action scene, which is actually my favorite ski chase in the entire franchise. And it ends with one of the most iconic stunts in the entire franchise. And after that we get a phenomenal Bond theme, which is also one of my all-time favorites. When I made my top 10 favorite Bond theme songs a while back, I believe I ranked this one at number 7, but since then it really grew even more on me, and I think right now I even rank it in my top 3. And the rest of the score throughout this movie is absolutely terrific. Again, it wasn't done by John Barry, but this time it was done by Marvin Hamlish. And I love that he has a completely different take on a James Bond soundtrack. It sounds completely different than anything we've heard before or since. And I think this is my favorite non-John Barry James Bond score in the series. And unlike the previous movie, this movie has one of the best Bond girls in the entire series. Anya Amasova, Agent Triple X, played by Barbara Bach. the concept of a female spy from the KGB teaming up with 007 is just timelessly classic. And because of some of the plot points set up in the pre-title sequences, their relation also is the emotional core of this movie. And I love that this movie has some emotional moments surrounding Bond and Anya. And the henchman, Jaws, is one of the most iconic and well-known henchmen in the entire franchise. And of course, one of my personal favorites as well. He is so memorable, he is extremely tall, and in some scenes he's just absolutely terrifying, unlike in the next movie. And pretty much all the action scenes in this movie are just absolutely phenomenal. Like the ski chase in the opening scene, the car chase with the Lotus Esprit, which is probably my favorite car chase in the entire franchise. You have the shootout aboard Leparis. You have some great fight scenes against Jaws. And the tone of this movie is a lot better than the previous three. This one is pretty light in tone, but it also has some great moments of suspense and thrills. And it also has some genuinely scary moments with Jaws. But none of it feels jarring or out of place. The tone to me in this movie is just perfect. Not taken too seriously until it needs to be taken seriously. And by this point, Roger Moore's take on James Bond is just perfected. In some of the previous movies, it felt like the producers were thinking like they were working with Sean Connery. But by this point, all of the things that worked for Sean Connery were dropped and they just played into Roger Moore's strength. So by this point, Roger Moore is just on top form and he's absolutely fantastic in this movie. And the scale of the story is just superb. It feels very grand, and yes, it is a tad similar to You Only Live Twice by setting two nations up against each other. But like I said, I think it's executed better in this movie. And on the whole, this is just an extremely entertaining movie, and it successfully brought Bond back to the top of cinema. In the end, I'm gonna give this movie a 9 out of 10 overall and a 9.5 on the entertainment scale. And I should say that this is a must watch even for non-Bond fans. So, that is my take on The Spy Who Loved Me. Comment down below what you think about this movie. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Or do you think it's okay? Whatever the case may be, comment down below. And I want to thank you for watching, and as always, I will return.